Welcome to Tomorrow Never Knows with me, Bob Wilson, and Sir Warren Brown of the Beatles Kingdom. Our guests tonight are people who met the Beatles and or saw them live. I speak of those special two Beatle authors, Patricia Gallo Stenman and Marty Edwards. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks. Glad to be
Welcome,
here.
welcome, Patricia. Welcome, Marty. And Patricia, it's so nice to talk to you again. I love having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. Nice talk. Thank you.
Mhm.
And now that we have that established, we have to thank our sponsor. Beatles Magazine is a publication with 370 plus million visitors in all their pages, read by thousands of fans around the world every day. Beatle news updated daily, 24 hours, audio, video, photos, interviews, contests, additional materials, and more. Follow Beatles Magazine, the most complete online coverage, 24 hours a day and 8 days a week.
8 days a week.
8 days a week. They all joined with me in the chorus. All right. I love it. So, Patricia, can you tell us about what happened on February 9th, 1964, 56
Yes.
years ago?
Yes, 56 years ago. It was absolutely amazing. 56 years ago, later this week, the Beatles appeared on CBS TV on a show called Ed Sullivan Show. Uh, Ed Sullivan was a coast to coast TV variety show. And in those days, it was a staple on Sunday evenings for families.
Mhm.
Uh, they had everybody on, from jugglers to musicians to Broadway show people. So everyone watched. It was actually TV's longest running variety show. It ran for 23 years, which was amazing. From 1948, the birth of TV, to 1971, and it ran on CBS. People say, well, who was Ed Sullivan? And Ed Sullivan was a skinny little guy who actually was a syndicated newspaper columnist in New York City. And he really didn't look like a TV performer at all. He looked like a newspaper. The night that the Beatles appeared, the first night, which was Sunday, the 9th of February, they sang 5 songs. They sang All My Loving, Till There Was You, She Loves You, I Saw Her Standing There, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. It was also interesting that, yes, they did sing those songs that night, but they were also on the show for the following 2 Sundays. They still were on their first US tour. So they were on, I think it was February 16th, and that was from Miami. The Ed Sullivan Show was brought from Miami that week. And the next week after that, February 23rd, they were, I think it was pre-filmed earlier. And so they actually had been on for 3 times during that tour. Um, Amazing. I think it was really amazing to hear that they also appeared 9 times on Ed Sullivan during their time as Beatles. I really don't know how many times they appeared after as solo artists. I'm not sure. But the important thing here is that that evening, we fledgling Beatlemaniacs, most of us picked out our favorite Beatle. It was kind of the first time most of us saw them on any TV show, and we saw them close up in black and white, which was really funny. They captioned while they were singing, they close-ups of them, and there was a caption under John's close-up that said, "Sorry, girls, he's married," which was kind of funny. So that was the story of Ed Sullivan and the Beatles.
I didn't know they were on 9 times. You got me with that one especially. I would have guessed like 5 or 4.
Yeah, I had no idea it was 9 times either. But that's pretty impressive because, if Ed Sullivan liked you, also this is another fact. If he liked you and he had you on his show, you were sure to be a hit because all of America saw you.
Mm-hmm.
But if Ed didn't like you, he was in the mafia, he could have you killed. Just kidding. Ed wasn't really in the mafia.
Could be, could be. Yep.
It's a really big shoe, a cement shoe. But
Yeah.
Pat, on your suggestion, we're dedicating this show to the original Beatlemaniacs. Tell us about these original Beatlemaniacs and why they are so close to your heart.
Well, the original Beatlemaniacs, or as I like to call them, the vintage Beatlemaniacs, we were really a breed apart. Beatlemaniacs actually lived, dreamed, and schemed to meet our idols. And
Sure.
we also, I could say we were addicted almost to the thrill of all things Beatles. And actually, I find that just a Beatles fan was very different than a Beatlemaniac. A Beatles fan liked the music, maybe went to see their movies, but a Beatlemaniac was an addict, really, in a nice, polite way.
True.
We also, there were thousands and thousands of us. We were mainly girls. We fell under the spell of George, Paul, John, and Ringo. First on this February 9th, most of us. And I always say we were a devoted lot. We really were. We followed everything, every record they released, everything they did through magazines and through our disc jockeys on radio. We waited in the rain, in the snow, and in the hot sun to catch a glimpse of them. Uh, we collected Beatles stuff. Now, nobody in those days called it memorabilia. My parents called it Beatle junk, and I called it Beatle stuff. $3 or $2.99 for a little Remco doll. I mean, it was Beatle junk. So it's true. And yeah, we love their films. And this is another thing. We had no videos, we had no DVDs. So what did we do? If we wanted to see the films over and over, we had to go to the movie theaters. And Beatlemaniacs were always watching their movies and going to the movies as long as that movie was in the theaters. And also, the saddest thing we used to do is that you could tell a true Beatlemaniac because when a Beatle got married, if you were a George fan, you would cry for days, and all your girlfriends would put their arms around you and make sure you didn't do anything stupid. It's like, but that was what a Beatlemaniac was. So
I
today,
cried for days and days when Ed Sullivan got married, but that's another story.
Poor Ed Sullivan. Yes. Today, I really salute the sheer devotion of these vintage Beatlemaniacs because, after 56 years, there's still many of us left, right, Marty? I mean,
That's true.
Yeah, and I think we're still out there, and we still group together as Beatle buddies. When like Marty and I and the other ladies, we attend conventions and concerts still, and do our part. And an interesting fact is this kind of fan devotion has not been seen again with any groups. No, I mean, never after the Beatles. And in the past, I can only think of 2 times that fans were so crazy, and that was over Elvis and Frank Sinatra.
And that's correct.
True.
That's true.
Mhm.
Yes.
Hey, Patricia, how come you have to use the word vintage? You make me feel old.
Oh, I think vintage is sort of shiny and wonderful.
It's better than antique.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, Marty. That is really true. Yes. Mhm.
Now, Patricia, your book, Diary of a Beatlemaniac, derives its title from all you've been telling us about so far. So I guess, you kind of told us a bit, but tell us about the title and the book itself.
Okay, well, Diary of a Beatlemaniac kind of explains itself because it's an in-depth look at what made first generation, that's another thing we call ourselves, first generation fans tick during its early days. And it also relives the magic of the moment behind the scenes. Now, my memoir is really compiled from my 58-year-old diary, so therefore the title Diary of a Beatlemaniac, but it also had inside its pages, I used my scrapbooks, I used my own Instamatic camera photographs, and also my original teenage newspaper columns. I wrote a column for a newspaper when I was very young about teenagers and music. It does offer a unique glimpse into the group. I call it the groovy days of the 60s, as seen through my eyes, as I was when I was 14 to 18. I was a Philly inner city schoolgirl, and also I tracked the milestones of the Beatles era. Again, starting from about Ed Sullivan. That's a very important date. Ed Sullivan,
Well, is that
February
why
9th.
Paul wrote that song?
Who's that?
Is that why Paul wrote that song?
Which song was that now?
Philly love songs.
Oh, Philly love song. There you. Oh, yes, silly Philly love songs.
But bump. Sorry,
Absolutely.
back to your story.
That's okay. Okay, and in my book, I've tried to write how did young Beatlemaniacs think? How do we plan our different attacks to meet them? What we wore in those days, what we bought as Beatle junk and stuff, why we bought this stuff. And the book also includes interviews with actor Victor Spinetti, who I had a fan club for, and top Philly DJ High Lit. It was also an honor to have an author, Larry Kane, who wrote a lot about the Beatles, and he's from Philly. He contributed to the book's foreword. So, one other thing about my book is that I really believe that the detailed documentation of a vintage fan retelling Beatle history will allow future generations, not my generation, we know this stuff, but allow future generations to understand more about what made Beatlemania tick,
Well, that's a good summation of a wonderful little book. And
Thank
more
you.
importantly, tell me, Pat, how did you and Marty come to know one another?
Okay. Well, we haven't known one another for too long, actually. We met at the Chicago Fest for Beatles fans in August 2018, right, Marty?
Yes, that's right. Uh-huh.
We were both in the author's room. We sat really near one another, and we do have a lot of Beatle friends in common. And the first time I met her, we actually bunked together at the hotel because when Beatle people go to these conventions and the rooms are very expensive, a lot of time, a lot of the women bunk together. Beforehand, we'll say, "Oh, my friend's coming, and let's share a room." So we bunked together that convention. And I have to say that Marty has a most wonderful story to tell in her book, if you haven't read it yet. And she has a great memoir, 16 and 64. And she, of course, has a great story about the Chicago fan club that she lorded over. And also, she actually met the Beatles. I never did.
Don't cut into her segment now. Leave her something.
Oh, okay. I promise. I promise. Okay.
All right. So, Sir Warren, we hand off to you.
And thank you, Bulldog. I appreciate it. Patricia, I like the word first generation a little better.
Oh.
That don't make me feel so old. Thank
Nope,
you.
nope.
And hello, Marty. How are you, my dear?
I'm well.
That is
Glad to
very.
be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome, and thank you for coming on. You were supposed to be on our show before, but you fell a little ill, and I hope you were feeling much better.
I am feeling much better. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can you tell us about your book and how it came about? That title being 16 and 64, will you please?
Sure. Well, in the process of trying to accomplish my goal of meeting the Beatles in 64, the entire experience left me with an interesting and sort of a fun story to tell. But hadn't shown anyone the pictures that I had. I had 15 to 16 glossy black and white photos from the press conference and that had never been published. So
Wow.
my book is titled, the whole title is 16 and 64, The Beatles and the Baby Boomers. And it's a story of my teenage life in the 60s and how I was determined to meet the Beatles. And as Patty said, the key word for a Beatlemaniac is schemer. And that's what we had to do to try to meet the Beatles.
Mhm.
So, and it's also a book about setting your goals and being positive and having faith in yourself that you can succeed and reach these goals.
Wow,
But
that
a few years ago, I was writing some articles and doing some advertising for the Elks local newspaper here in Phoenix. And my editor and I were talking about the Beatles. And he said, I said something about just casually, well, I met them. And he said, you did not, you met them? I said, yes. And I have glossy 8x10s to prove it. They're up in my closet. So I pulled out the 8x10s and showed them to him. And he said, he was just taken aback. And he said, oh my goodness, why in the heck haven't you done something with these? So I said, well, what do I do with them? I don't know what to do with them. You know, I don't want to put them out on, over the online because somebody could take them. And so he said, well, no, he said, I think you should write a book. And I think you should use these pictures in the book. And so he and I discussed it. Actually, Mark from the Beatle Fest years ago, I had showed him the pictures also, and he had suggested that I write a book. Mark Lapidos.
okay.
So anyway, so I was talking to Joe about it, and I said, you know, Joe, I was 16 and 64. And he said, there's the title of your book right there, 16 and 64. So we
Very,
went with that,
very good.
and he had already he had published a couple of books. I knew nothing about that. And actually he sort of guided me in it. So he's my co-author, and he would say, get chapter 1 done, decide what you want to do for chapter 1, and you should have it done in 3 weeks. So he sort of set a schedule for me. And so we were able to get the book out fairly in a decent time frame. But, you know, I have to move back and say that in Chicago, we had a little bit of a unique situation, I believe, there because the VJ label was located in Chicago, and they had acquired a contract to release several Beatle songs early. And the WLS radio station in Chicago was playing those songs as early as the spring of 1963. So I was in high school, and I was age 15 then, but I was also taking summer classes down at the Art Institute, Chicago. I was taking some drawing and painting classes. And our instructor would allow us to listen to the radio. So of course we all had WLS on, and they were playing these Beatle tunes. So we were listening to Beatles songs in the spring and the summer of 63. By the time the Ed Sullivan Show rolled around in 64, we had already started our fan club in the fall of 63. We had already chosen our favorite Beatle. And actually in Chicago, there was a large fan base of Beatle fans already by the time the Ed Sullivan Show came around.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah. So my book is just a little bit of the history of the times and about our struggles that we had trying to meet the Beatles. And and I'm happy to say that my book was asked to be part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives.
Wow, what an honor.
I think due to the history that was involved in it. So
That's an honor.
yes, I felt like that was an honor.
Yes, it is.
Uh-huh.
Very nice. Very interesting way you came up with the title of your book. I think it was pretty smart. Sounds good. You mentioned Phoenix and you mentioned Chicago. Which place are you from? Chicago?
Well, actually, I'm a Virginia girl, but we moved to Chicago when I was very little. And so I felt like Chicago was my home. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and we actually in a suburb called Park Forest. I don't know if you're familiar with it, on the south side of
No, ma'am.
Chicago. And I sort of felt like Chicago was my home. We were transferred out here, or I should say my family was transferred out to Phoenix in 71. And I came out with them for a while, but I missed Chicago so much that I went back and worked in Chicago, until about 76, 77, and then came back out to Phoenix.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
You almost sound like me. I was born here in Maryland, and my family transferred to Las Vegas, which isn't too far from Phoenix. And I came back here to Maryland. So you got a family history sort of like mine.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And
Okay.
I still miss Chicago to this day. And unfortunately, when we go to the Beatle Fest, it's out near the airport, and we don't get a chance to get into the city. So, I thought maybe next time I go, I'll take a bit of a longer, a little vacation and see some of Chicago again.
Yeah, it ought to be nice. I've never been to Chicago, so, but I'm sure it's a big city.
Oh yeah, and my 55th high school reunion is coming up. 55.
Wow.
Wow.
Congratulations.
I know. That's yeah. That's so I'm anxious to go back and see all my friends that are there.
Wow, that sounds very nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned a Beatles fan club. How did you get that started?
Okay. Well, actually, it was in the fall of '63, and as I said, we'd go out and buy these magazines, and we'd buy two at a time, and we'd all meet at the local little place in the mall, and we'd sit, and I'm sure the people at the restaurant thought we were nuts because we'd go through these Beatle magazines trying to, not scream too loud, but every time we'd flip the page over, it was one of our favorite Beatles, but we'd buy two, one to keep and one to tear apart and put up on our walls.
Yeah.
But that was it was a group of about 6 girls, and we all loved the Beatles so much, and we were all in high school together, and so it was natural for us to start a fan club. We began with our local club, and the paper in our little town of Park Forest decided they were going to run some stories on our fan club and how it progressed. And that was the Park Forest Star. So they started running some small articles on the club. And that particular paper wasn't just in Park Forest, it went out to several of the suburbs around Park Forest. So we started getting all this mail coming in asking to become part of the fan club. people wanted to join the fan club. And we really hadn't thought of how we were going to figure that out. I was only 15. My mother went to Richton Park Post Office, which was the little town next door, next to Park Forest. And she opened a post office box for us. And we started getting our mail. The club was titled the Chicagoland Beatle People. And because of these articles, it grew rapidly. I mean, we were up to 500 members in no time.
Right.
So I was president of the club, and as president, I sent out newsletters, of course, with the help of all the other girls, you know, and our parents helped too. We planned Beatle rallies, we made posters, we made signs, we baked treats to take to the senior center there in town. We attended meetings, we took trips downtown. I wrote so many letters, it wasn't funny, and I made all sorts of phone calls, one of which was to George Harrison's sister, Louise Harrison Caldwell, who also lived in Illinois at the time. She lived down in Benton, Illinois. And we just one day out of the blue called her and asked her if she would sponsor our club. And she said, well, what do I have to do? We said, well, you don't have to do anything. We just want to be able, you know, be able to tell people that you're sponsoring our club. And she was the nicest person. And she said, sure, I'll do that, girls. And she said, when I come up to Chicago, she asked for our phone numbers. And she said, I'll give you guys a call and we'll all meet and have lunch together.
Wow.
So that was really nice of her to do that. So at a certain point in the fan club, we decided, well, you know, how are we going to meet the Beatles? There's got to be a way for us to meet the Beatles. What are we doing? And so we decided, well, how about a plaque? Let's give the Beatles a plaque. So we went to our local hobby shop, and all the plaques were so darn expensive to have made. We didn't really have any money. We were just babysitting and using our babysitting money for stamps for the fan club. And we had not asked the fan club for any kind of dues of that, you know, they just joined us, and I would send them newsletters and so forth. So I thought, well, maybe we could ask them for a quarter. So here comes a quarter in all these envelopes from all over the Chicago area.
Wow.
This poor little post office in Richton Park, they had boxes and boxes of mail that we had to go through. But anyway, you know, there's a philosophy that you can just let things happen, and there's also philosophy that you have to make things happen.
Right.
And we were determined that we were going to make this happen, and we were going to meet the Beatles. Back in those days, we only had ourselves to spread the word, so we met in groups, fan club groups. We showed up in masses to meet the Beatles, to show the Beatles how much we cared about them and how much we loved them. And I believe that fan clubs in those days were important in bringing people together and unifying the fans.
I agree.
Yeah. So
Can I?
We were finally successful, and on September 5th, 1964, we were able to present our plaque to the Beatles at their Chicago press conference at the Stockyard Inn's restaurant.
Wow.
Upstairs in the ballroom, actually.
Wow.
And it was the Stockyard Inn's was right next to the International Amphitheater. They were connected.
Right.
And that's where the Beatles performance was that year, at the International Amphitheater.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Can I ask you how much money you made from your fan club? If you can tell me. If you can't, that's fine. That's fine. Just, I'm curious. That's all.
You mean when they sent in the quarters?
Yes, ma'am.
Just just enough to buy the plaque. That was it.
Well, that's good.
So,
That's
yeah, so we had enough to buy the plaque and have it engraved. And so I had told everybody that was going to contribute 25 cents that they would have their name written and it would be taped to the back of the plaque so that
wow.
it could be presented to the Beatles. And it was. We had a letter taped to the back of the plaque.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah.
I wish my name was on the back. Um, you said you met Louise Harrison. I also did too, at Beatles Fest in New York one year,
Mhm.
and she signed a book for my wife. And you're right, she is a very sweet person and easy to talk to, and very informative. Um, I
I saw her the night of the conference.
right.
That's the second time I spoke to her because we hadn't met since I spoke with her on the phone, and she was at the table right next to us. And I went over and I introduced myself to her. I recognized her, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry we never got together." So in just a real nice person. And years later, well, I believe it was 2018 when I first met Patty at the Chicago conference. Louise was there, and I took my little picture of her.
Mm,
I had a picture of her in the audience, and I at the conference, and I said, "Louise, I haven't seen you since 1964." And she looked at it, and she had been really sick that year, and she started
mhm.
crying. She started crying, and
Wow.
it really touched me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, she was a nice lady.
If you have any pictures that you like for me to put in the video on this show, can you send them to Bob and I'll most certainly get them on for you?
Sure, I will do that.
I would appreciate that. That would help me out a whole lot.
All right. Yes.
Thank you for
Good.
that very much.
I have about 18 black and white glossies that were taken at the press conference, but I only put about 5 or 6 in the book. So there's a
Okay.
lot that were not put in the book.
Okay.
So
Um, if they're copyrighted or anything,
yeah,
I won't use them. But if you let me go ahead and use them, I'll put them on the video.
yeah, they were given to me. So back in 64, they were given to me. So they're
Well, that's great. That's great. I bet you cherish them.
oh my goodness, I do. And I have them I had them in a little folder in the top of my closet. And I had twin girls, and when they were growing up, I'd show them to them occasionally and then put them back in the top of the closet. I didn't want anything to happen to them.
Right.
But I never pressured my kids to listen to Beatle music. Um, I would put on my headphones and I would listen quietly. And I figured, let them arrive at who they like. It's their. But one day when they were in junior high, this is kind of funny. They all came in, a whole group of girls came in. There must have been 6 or 7 or 8 of them. And my daughter said, "Mom, where are those pictures of you with the Beatles?" And I said, "Well, they're in the closet." And they said, "Well, they all want to see them." And I said, "Well, why do they want to see them?" "Well, we like the Beatles." So they arrived at liking the Beatles themselves. I didn't have anything to do with it. They just have great taste, and that's why they arrived at liking the Beatles themselves.
Can you tell us about the times you've seen the Beatles in concert?
Well, I saw the Beatles that year at the International Amphitheater. And then the next year in 65, they were at White Sox Park. I think it was Comiskey Park, I believe then. And, I was way up in the rafters on that one. So you could just, here I was at International Amphitheater. I was right below the stage, standing right by John Lennon. Because
Wow.
we went in with the press. I went in because I had been in the press conference, so I went in with the press, and we were right below the stage. So now the next year, I'm up in the stands. Wait, I couldn't even hardly see them. But, and then the following year, they came back and they played the International Amphitheater again for the third time. So I saw them in concert then for the third time. And,
Wow.
And then I've seen George, no, I've seen Paul several times here in Phoenix and in Las Vegas. And then I've seen Ringo in Las Vegas. So it was just a thrill, though, to be able to see them in
I,
person.
yeah, I can just imagine that. I never got that privilege, and I envy you.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Well, even better than a concert, you touched on this earlier. You had the pleasure of meeting them. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Um, at their press conference when I met them.
Yes, if that's when you met them, that'll be fine.
Okay, so that year we went in. That was the first year they went to the International Amphitheater,
Hmm.
and of course I had my plaque. And we weren't sure that we were going to be able to get in, but they told us, well, at least try to get in and bring your plaque. Well, I had given my plaque because I didn't think I was going to be able to get in, to tell you the truth. So I had given
Hmm.
my plaque to Lee Phillips. She was a radio host and radio TV personality in Chicago. And I had given the plaque to her to take into the conference because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to do this. And at the last minute, we were sitting in, my dad had come along with us and taken us down to the International Amphitheater.
So
And
he encouraged
he,
you
well,
to,
he encouraged, he wanted to make sure we were safe.
right?
So we all went in a station wagon, and there was about 5 or 6 of us girls and 2 dads.
Right.
And I'm sure they were going, oh dear, but we were waving plaques that we had made, singing songs, and we got there where we were able to park and able to get into the hotel part. There was just swarms of, crowds pushing and shoving, and everybody was holding hands, and we were able to get into the hotel. And I said, well, I don't have the plaque. I can't present it to them. So we went, my dad said, well, I'm going to go into the bar with the other father that was with us, and we want you girls to come and sit down at the table and we'll get you Cokes. So we went in and we had Cokes, and all of a sudden I turned around to look, and my dad was speaking to Derek Taylor.
Wow.
And I said, oh my, that's Derek Taylor. And so there was 4 of us. And we just knocked over the chairs and ran over to Derek. And he said, well, what are you girls doing in this bar? And my dad explained, well, they're with me. This is my daughter, and she was hoping to present her plaque to the Beatles. So he said, well, where is the plaque? And I said, well, I gave it to Lee Phillips, and I don't know where she's at because she's a TV personality.
Mhm.
So he said, well, I'll wait here at the bar and you go see if you can find her. So we all ran out into the lobby looking for Lee Phillips and her cameraman, and snatched the book out of their, snatched the plaque right out of their arms. And we said, we'll explain later, ran back into the bar, showed it to Derek Taylor. And he said, well, this looks wonderful. He said, why don't you present it? I said, well, I was hoping you'd say that, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah.
So he scribbled a note on a little piece of paper, and he said, please allow these girls to go to the press conference. They are going to present a plaque, Derek Taylor.
Wow.
Anyway, we got up to the Andy Frayne usher that was blocking the staircase to get upstairs, and he would not let us in.
Mm.
And we said, oh, you know, here's our note. Here's our note from Derek Taylor. He goes, I don't want to see that. You have to have a press pass.
Wow.
So it was the four of us standing in a line, and all of a sudden my dad comes up behind us and pushes us, and the poor Andy Frayne usher goes tumbling backwards, and we sort of just stepped over him and ran up the staircase.
Wow.
Yeah, and the poor guy was, come back, you girls, come back. And my dad, I turned around and looked at my dad. My dad was saying, keep going, keep going. So anyway, we made it upstairs to where the ballroom was. That's where they were going to have the press conference. And Derek Taylor saw us upstairs, and he said, okay, you girls come and sit here at this table. He told us where to sit. And he said, I'll tell you when you're going to come up and present your plaque to the Beatles. He was just the nicest person.
Right.
Yes, he really was.
Did
So,
you,
yeah.
did you, I'm sorry, did you happen to keep that note from Derek Taylor?
You know what? I had it for years and I can't find it.
Wow. That's not something you would want to
Yeah.
lose.
And I had it with all my Beatle things, and all of a sudden I cannot find it. I could
Wow.
just kick myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
can imagine.
I did have a note from Tony Barrow, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a note from him scribbled out and his name on it.
Wow.
I cannot find my Derek Taylor note. I don't know
Right.
what.
And well, either note or both would have been great.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sorry for cutting you off. Can you please continue with your story? I'm sorry.
No, no. And so we were sitting at the table, and all of a sudden I realized, well, then I saw George's sister, and then I went over and spoke to her at the other table. And when they came in from the other side of the room, and everybody just ran over to the other side of the room around the Beatles. And I followed, and I'm standing there. I said, I see John, I see Paul, I see George, but I don't see Ringo. Where's Ringo? And he turned around and he said, here I am, darling. And he was standing right in front of me. I didn't know
Wow.
it was him.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah. So anyway, we were called up to the platform, and I'm standing there. I said, well, I hadn't planned to present this plaque. Lee Phillips was going to present the plaque, and what do I say to them? I don't know what to say, you know.
Well,
So I'm just standing there trying to figure out what I'm going to say to the Beatles, you know.
mhm.
And then John turned around and he made a funny face at us and waved his hands, and that just put me at ease when he did that.
Wow, that's cool.
Uh-huh. And so then we stepped up on the platform, all of us at one time, and presented the plaque to the Beatles.
Wow,
Yes.
that is very nice. That's something for memories there.
Oh yeah.
I hope you have pictures of that.
I do have pictures of it, and they're in
Uh,
the book. Uh-huh. And the way I was able to get the pictures, about a week after this conference, I had no camera, nothing with me, because I didn't think we were going to meet them. And
right.
so a fellow, whole group of students from my high school showed up at my front door. And they said, we knew it was you. We knew it was you. And they came in and they said, look at these pictures. And they had about 15 to 16 glossy 8x10s of me presenting the plaque to the Beatles.
Wow.
And
That,
I said, well, where did these come? You know, and the fellow that was there, he had been a photographer for his college, and he gave them to me along with negatives.
wow, that's very nice.
Yeah, that was very nice of him. Yes, so I have those.
That is great. And if you can send me some pictures, any pictures you can send me, I would appreciate. Bulldog told me of this story, and I'm going to ask you.
Mm.
Did John Lennon actually pinch you?
Well, when we went up on the platform to talk to the press, well, actually, it was the press was right in front of us, all their microphones. I was so scared. My knees were shaking, and I was talking to the Beatles. Actually, it was John and George and Ringo that were. Paul was sort of taking care of the press, but
Hmm.
he was listening in. But the three of them were more looking at us, and so I had presented the plaque to the Beatles, and I said to them, "And please take it because it's very heavy." This is what I said. I was ready to drop the plaque because I was so nervous. And John said to me, "Well, I better take that then because I don't want you dropping it."
Hmm.
So anyway, but he was very nice. And so then the press started yelling at us and they said, "Girls, come up here, come up to the front." And so we walked up to the front of the table and they said, "How do you feel meeting the Beatles?" And one of the fellows was Ron Riley, who I knew from WLS radio station. And he said, "You did it! You succeeded! You got to meet the Beatles!" And we were saying, "Yay, yay!" And they're standing right there, thinking, "Why are these girls being interviewed?" Anyway, so I said, I'm numb. I'm completely numb. I don't know what to think." And so John reached over and pinched my arm and he goes, "Well, you feel that, don't you?"
Oh, wow.
So he did pinch my arm.
Are
So
you
and
one of them persons that if your idol touches you, you don't wash your arm for a
oh, I
week?
did. I did. And all the girls wanted to kiss my arm because John
Yeah.
John had pinched me there. So
Oh, very funny. That good story too. That's amazing.
yes. So anyway, we were just in a daze. I mean, I was just Derek Taylor had to say to us, "Okay, girls, now you can step down from the platform," because I wasn't moving. So he said, "Please go take your seat." But
Yeah.
then at the end of the conference, he said to us, "Go ahead and go with the press. Follow the press," because he had told them to exit at a certain way so that they could get to the International Amphitheater through the hotel and down right to the front of the stage.
Wow, that's
So
cool.
he said to us, "Go with the press because you'll get to stand right in front of John."
Wow.
And we did. We were right in front. All the Andy Frayne ushers were behind us and we were right in front.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Mhm.
I got one more question to ask, and then I'm going to hand it off to the Bulldog. And I have to ask, who is your favorite Beatle?
Well, I like all the Beatles. I have to say that. But I always, when you're 15 and 16 years old, you have to pick a favorite.
Yeah.
And so we would make posters of our favorite Beatles, little hand posters to hold up, and mine was John. And I always liked John because I felt like he had a strong personality. He was the leader of the group, and I just I don't know. I just thought he was just so neat because, and plus, he was an art student and I was an art student.
Hmm.
So I think I liked him for all those reasons. Plus, he was very handsome. There's another reason. But I liked all the Beatles. I really did. And I've seen Paul and Ringo in concert many times out west.
You must be in heaven, that's for sure. And just to let you know, John is my favorite Beatle too.
Yes, he's terrific fellow.
All right, Bulldog, I'm going to hand it off to you. And thank you very much, Marty.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, with all these memories, speaking of memories, Pat, can you tell us a little bit about past and present Beatle fests and what's special about them? And you going on? Are you guys going, or what's up with that?
Okay, well, I like Marty have gone to several Beatle fests, and I was able to go to the ones in New York much more easily than the ones in Chicago. Um, there's always a good feeling at Beatle Fest, and
Mhm,
what I like about it too is that there's sometimes three generations now of fans. I mean, there's
mhm,
my generation, and then there's our grown children's generation, and some grandchildren, because there's younger people
mhm.
too, younger kids. So it's very much a family affair. Um, and yes, I will be at the New York Fest, the Metro Fest in Jersey City, New Jersey, with my book on from March 27th to 29th, and be doing some, panels and PowerPoint presentation. Um, Also, plans are that Marty and I will be at the Chicago Fest in August, and hopefully we two will be on a panel to chat about, being original Beatle fans. Um, and it's really a special experience where so many fans for so many generations converge under the same roof. We have so much in common, and 3 days of music and guest stars, and just the feeling of being able to sit and listen to lectures by these people and on different subjects. It's
Mhm.
really interesting. And it's been going on now, at least a fest for Beatle fans. I think we're into the 44th year.
That's right.
So is
Yeah.
it? Yeah, it's 44 years. So
Mhm.
it's been a long time, but I want to continue on with it like Marty, and it's fun to have a book and to be able to be a part of the authors group and be on stage and things. It's very interesting. Am I right, Marty?
Oh, yes. It's a fun 3 days for everybody. And
Yeah.
I met such wonderful people that I never imagined that I would meet,
Right.
and including you.
Well,
But I mean,
thank you.
just other authors and people that are know about the Beatles, historians, and then they have their guests there who are musicians, and
Hmm.
it's just nice.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
nice 3 days of
it's
Beatles.
a it is. It's a good mix of musicians and authors and fans, and you
Mm,
can get up and touch them and get personal and get
oh
their
yeah.
autographs and buy their books and listen
Right.
to them. It's very nice. It's
Mhm.
it's it's well worth it.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Well, we all love the Beatles, but I love some other groups too. Maybe not as much, but Herman's Hermits, the Monkeys. Pat, are there any other groups that you love, but maybe not as much as the Beatles?
Oh dear. Where do I begin? I like a lot of different types of music. So when you talk about groups, and I think about, vintage or old groups, I can think about, for example, the Doors, the Beach Boys. I like the duos like Peter and Gordon and Chad and Jeremy, and
Wow.
well, Sonny and Cher, the Fifth Dimension. I mean, there were so many. Motown, the Four Tops, the Temps, the Supremes, the Ronettes. It goes on to stuff like the Four Seasons, Jay and the Americans. Oh my goodness, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. And there were doo-wop groups that I loved from the 50s, like Little Anthony and also the Diamonds. Um, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, the Righteous Brothers. I don't want to. I have a list here, so they're folk groups I like the Smothers Brothers and the Kingston Trio and the Weavers. And there's a lot of groups from the 50s and the 60s, which I'm concentrating on now. And there's also, besides groups, there's single people, entertainers like Sinatra and Dean Martin. I'm going back to the 50s now and the 40s, and Cher, of course, from the 60s, and Elvis, and oh, it goes on and on. There were so many people and folk people like Pete Seeger and Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, Carole King, and of course I won't even go on to the country and western groups. Uh, I like a lot of different music, and I like to mix it up. And basically, because I'm older, I still like the 50s, 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and some of the 70s,
Wonderful stuff. And just like, when you talk about having been an original fan, forgetting other people, just what does it mean just to you? Like not, nobody else's opinion, none of these other people. What does that moment in time mean to you?
Well, I think that, yeah, I was an original fan, and that was great, but and it means a lot to me, but also I think it's for people who really like music. I think it's never too late to be a Beatles fan, even if they're not original or vintage fans, and it's never too late to be a fan of music of any group or individual performer, and you can just start by listening, and you start collecting their stuff, and you start by following them on websites and stuff. So you don't have to be an original fan.
This is true. Now, here's a real important question. Where can the listeners go to find your books and your fan pages and such, your blogs?
Okay. You start with Marty or me here?
We'll start with you and move over to Marty.
Okay. Well, okay, you could actually start by looking at my website. I have a website called diaryofabeatlemaniac.com. It sort of all runs together. That's my website. I have a blog that I keep every month. Also, you can order the book through my website, and I'll autograph it. Also, you can get my book on Amazon.com or through my publisher out of Pennsylvania called Cynren Press. That's Cynren. And you can also find my book at some local bookstores, or order it from bookstores like Barnes and Nobles. Now, in addition to my website, I do have a Facebook page, which is under my name, Patricia Gallo Stenman. I have a Facebook professional site, which is under my book's name, Diary of a Beatlemaniac. I have a LinkedIn, which I update with Beatle things, and that is under my name. And Instagram is, I keep that, and that's under Beatlemaniac Diary. So thank you very much.
Well, you're quite welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And now we pass on the question. Tell us where we can find your book and your other goings on, Marty.
All right. I have a website, and it's www.16and64.com. And it is the entire title of the book, 16 and 64, The Beatles and the Baby Boomers. And then you can find me also on 16and64.com is also on the website. So,
okay.
Yes.
And if ever Google's your name in the book, that stuff's also going to likely show up too.
Oh.
So good. We have a tradition to close the show. We usually like to sing the end, not because everyone is great singers, but because it sends us off on a positive. So what do you say? Will you guys participate, and will you sing the end with us?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I'll start it off, and you, excuse me, you guys take the middle, and then Warren will close us out. And we thank you both for being here. It was fun. You ready?
Thank you.
Ready.
You're most welcome. And in the end,
the love you take
is equal to the love you make. Do, 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 do. I thank you girls very much.